not a super formal class, but I do want to make a few things clearer for people as you're trying to figure out what you need for sources and articles and all that for these next two essays. So what we have coming up is, right, we have the annotated bibliography, and then we have the literature review, and then we have the research argument paper. And so I thought I may as well give people an idea of what these are about and how to think about them, and at this time when you're looking for articles, especially, like, so it would be super helpful, right, to sort of know what it is you'll actually need and what you plan to actually do with it. So okay, I'll probably repeat this a lot, but here's the main idea right here in this special area. If you can see them over there. Okay, so for the literature, so for the annotated bibliography, that's just basically, here are the sources I have, and for each source you create an annotation, which is a longer paragraph in which you do three things. You summarize the source, you evaluate the source, and then you compare the source or connect the source to one of your other sources. So that's essentially what the annotated bibliography is for. It's basically a way to sort of just start in people's minds anyway, right? It's to start the process of focusing in on your subject, right? So what you want to do is you want to locate people who know about your subject, who have talked about it, who have written about it, and so that you can say, okay, here are these smart people who did this, who know about this, and here's what they wrote, and here's how they connect and interact with each other. Great. And then you're going to write the literature review, which is an actual essay in which you talk about these articles in relationship to a certain idea that you have, that you're sort of working towards. And this is what I'm going to reveal, this great exciting idea here. So you want to find, for sure, you need to find article or sources that do two things. But for the literature review, it's super important that it does this. Here's what you're going to need to do in the literature review eventually. You're going to need to establish when your traditional narrative began, like who or what caused the narrative to emerge. Okay, that's one thing you're going to have to talk about. You need to explain the main elements involved in your traditional narrative, right? So I'm still doing higher education. So I'm going to need to talk about, so when did this concept of going to college was necessary for success sort of really begin, and who began it? Was there a group of people? Was there one person? So how did it start? I don't need to go all the way back to the Greek times, right, where they like started to learn. I just need to get back to this American narrative where college is important or something. All right, so I have to talk about when it came about. I need to explain the elements that are involved in this narrative, right? So the elements that are involved are basically, the players, right? So you got the college administration people, you've got professors, you've got students, you've got textbook, writers or something. These are all part of the traditional narrative that I'm going to be focusing on. And then you will need to explain how the narrative spread and became dominant. So what is it that helped this particular narrative of yours sort of become common and become understood and accepted, and everybody's like, yep, that's the way it's going to be. So this is actually, right, the focus of the literature review. So my suggestion at the moment is that you find like 3 to 4 articles or sources that help you establish the traditional narrative, and then find 2 or 3 articles that maybe help you explain how it changed, or how it's changing, or was changing, or changed. In the simplest terms, your literature review will be about your traditional narrative, and then your research argument essay will use your stuff about your traditional narrative to talk about how it changed, what the consequences of the change are or were, and sort of where the narrative is going. So that's the big broad picture. And knowing that, the earlier the better, hopefully. And so this week, right, the three tasks so far, you have writing H, which is helping you sort of flesh out and talk about the two narratives, your traditional narrative. And I've made some comments on the one, let me put the link back from last class. Oh, it's already down here. Okay. So I've made some comments, and I think most people have seen them, but some people, I've made some, if you want to sign in to take a look at those. Mostly what I'm trying to get people to do is really think about, finding information about when this whatever your traditional narrative is, how it started, right? This idea, and so this common belief, whatever, where it came from. Again, if there's a person involved, right, or a group, you want to find out information about that, and then you sort of want to figure out how it spread or whatever. So that's the first thing. And then the second essay will be using stuff that you wrote for the literature review and then adding to it. And that's essentially what's happening. Okay, everyone will use the three Fisher sources because essentially we're going to still do we're going to put the narrative paradigm in there, right? The way that will happen is that you're going to for the literature review, it's basically going to be like, here's the traditional narrative, and when we look at it through the paradigm, here's what we see. All that means is you're basically changing the language to talk about character, plot, setting, stuff like that. But I wouldn't worry about that too much now. The thing to really worry about, or to get finished, or to find, are articles and sources that will help you talk about your subject. So I'm going to do this also here. Like, I'm going to search for articles that will help me. I think I have one that'll probably work of the ones that I found. Okay, so this is not too bad. So even in my article, so this one I'll probably use. Like, in the past, students who were not inspired and challenged by general education courses still persevered, believing that a college degree was essential to upward mobility and a good life. Right? That's part of that narrative. So that might help me talk about that. This is the traditional role of the professor. So I'll probably still be able to use that one. So if this is not making sense, please find a way to type or ask me a question. Would be great. Let's see, contingent labor in higher education. Okay, this is more about changing. This is the change from everybody's a full-time faculty professor to many part-time. So that's going to be mostly useful for me when I talk about the changes. So, like, in order to do this the best way possible, you want to have sort of a clear idea of what your traditional narrative is, right? And so last class, some people just wrote like a sentence or two just to get the general idea, but you want to be able to be more specific, right? Like, I'll show you what I mean by that. I have, so let's see if this is this chapter. One of the things that might help you is to expand out your traditional narrative, like to say more about it, focus in on some things. So for example, here's my traditional narrative. I have students in America can become educated people and obtain good white-collar jobs by acquiring a college education. That was one of the stories in the olden days. Students can work their way through college. That's another part of the story from the olden days. Students will gain the information and knowledge they need from the traditional college learning environment and academic structure. Right, meaning you show up, everybody learns the same, you sit in lecture, you take notes, you answer quizzes, you like regurgitate for tests, and then you move on and have a good job, essentially, all right? So just by expanding out my traditional narrative, I have more to focus on, to look for when I'm looking for sources, right? I can not just keep putting in like what I'm doing, like traditional college. I can also put, the cost of college, like, so what happened there? Like, when did that start to go up, and when was this? So it just might help you expand out what you can look for as far as sources go. All right, so I think I'm at a, so I will mute myself as I'm looking for stuff here. If you have a question, you can just type it in. But I'm just also showing, sort of going through the database idea. I'm trying to find things. If you find books, they may be good, meaning like a chapter might be good, right? You don't need to read the entire book by any stretch, but you might find one chapter or part of a chapter that's useful. Again, the good thing about using the database is that it does the citation for you, and that's like just one less thing you actually have to worry about. So here's this book about liberal arts and the future of public higher education. I picked it because I'm assuming in order to write a book about the future of it, you would have to have addressed the past. So I'm thinking there might be some chapter in here that might be useful. Okay, so like something like this might not be bad, because it basically is going to set out what a great healthcare system has, right? And then and hopefully gives information about why people think the American one is solid. And see if that works. I don't know if that link will actually work. Great. But that might be worth. So basically it's a game of trying to like use different keywords to see which one's going to work. Maybe best healthcare in the world. But there should be a bunch more, right? Future of healthcare. So anything that has to do with the future or change, right? If it's well written, whatever it is, it has to at least state sort of what the traditional one for nursing. Okay. So you want to focus, Michaela, you want to focus more on nursing and healthcare. You need to do the APA thing now, just because you need it from now on. So you may as well just get it done. So you might need. So that's the one that's basically about change, which could be useful for when you start to really focus on change. Okay, this is 2017. If you're going to focus on, Michaela, if you're going to focus on like narrative therapy or narrative medicine, which are both right? Those both things that are happening. Those are both sort of treatments, right? Like types of treatments, also diagnostic tools of some sort. You want to establish before those existed what diagnostic tools were being used and like what treatments were and so on. Okay, right. This is like a serious history. Like I don't think we need to be going back that far. Nurses, science, and the growth of hospitals. Maybe. Could always revisit the pandemic of 1918. So if people are still there, I'm going to go ahead and try to, as I find articles, right, I create little folders for them. So the healthcare ones that I found today, you can access, I believe, you can access the folder and then try to label them, but not super great. But again, 4 sources would be great for the traditional narrative, and then you can 2 for the changing. And again, also it's sort of like when we get to the final research paper, I'll talk about like other sources that we need to find, like a primary source and stuff like that. So we'll throw that. But for this annotated bibliography and literature review, basically you're in good shape if you just sort of find 3 to 4 sources that'll help you talk about this traditional narrative and where it came from and so on. So those are the only 3 things due by Sunday, right? Writing H, the discussion board, and the reading list. I should make that clear just so people know. And you want the reading list to be APA. So you want all 8 sources to look like APA. When you go to Canvas, you'll see that I put the 3 that I did for you already in APA.